Hi guys, welcome to your note-taking day. Today's notes are going to be over chemical formulas. So go ahead and grab your paper, your pencil, and write down chemical formulas as your title for your notes. We're going to first start out by just making sure we know the definition of chemical formulas. And we know that a chemical formula is a representation of all of the atoms that are going to be found in an compound. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples of compounds, and then we're going to make sure that we can look at the formulas and identify some different characteristics of these formulas and talk about the vocabulary with them. So I'm going to give you the formula or compound 2AlSO4. Notice I put parentheses around SO4, and we're going to talk about what those parentheses will do. But right now, we're going to make sure that we can identify the parts of the chemical formula. The first part of the chemical formula we want to talk about are our subscripts. Our subscripts are the little numbers, and that should be a 2 here, that are below and behind our elements. So when we are looking at 2Al2SO4, we're going to break down this chemical formula and talk about the different parts of it. The first parts we're going to discuss are what I have circled, the 2 and the 4. These numbers that are behind the element as well as below the element are going to be called our subscripts. And again, we identify subscripts as the small numbers below and behind an element. So our subscripts tell us how many atoms of that element that we see. Now, one thing to point out, if there is no number behind an element, that element still counts as 1. Only when we have more than one of them to show will we add a 2, a 3, or a 4, and so forth. If there is no number behind, we can put an imaginary 1 as our subscript, or we can just know that that one element represents 1 atom of sulfur, because we can still see sulfur. Now, looking at the next part of our formula here, I'm going to rewrite 2Al2SO4, making sure I put parentheses around the SO4. And on this one, I'm going to put a box around what we like to call the coefficient. So any number that is a big number in front of an element is called our coefficient. So we're going to spell that COEFFICIANT, coefficient. Again, the coefficients are the big numbers in front of an element. Coefficients. Now, coefficients have a very, very important job. Coefficients are going to tell us how many compounds we have. So when we look at this example, we have two formulas or two compounds, two molecules of Al2SO4. So we could write this a couple of different ways. I can take this and I can spell it out twice, like so. And that is the same as me adding a 2 in front of this compound. So me having 2 Al2SO4 means I have 2 of these formulas, compounds, combined together. The point of making sure that we can represent coefficients and subscripts in a chemical formula is so that we can count how many elements and atoms that we have for a formula. So there are some counting rules that we want to talk about when we get ready to represent this, because we need to figure out how many aluminums, how many sulfurs, how many oxygens do we have. So looking at that formula again, 2Al2SO4, we have our coefficient and we have our subscripts. The job of a coefficient and a subscript is so that we can multiply them together. So we're going to multiply the coefficient times the subscript, making sure that we understand our coefficient is the one we boxed in green, and our subscripts are the ones that we circled in red. So we multiply these two things together, then we're going to figure out the first part of our rules. The first part of the rule is to list your elements. The second part of that rule is to count the atoms. And the third part of that rule is to total your atoms. So list, count, total, list, count, total. So the first thing I'm going to do is list my elements, and those will be the ones that have capitalized letters. So if we look at the formula, 2Al2SO4, I have a capital A, and I have a capital S, and I have a capital O. So my element Al, which is aluminum, my element sulfur, which is S, and my element O, which is capitalized for oxygen. So I have listed my capitalized elements. Now I'm going to count these elements and atoms individually by using the subscript and coefficient. Now, I can take these and multiply them across. Using my coefficient and multiplying it by my subscript, 2 times 2 is going to give me a total of 4. This is for aluminum. The subscript is behind aluminum, so I'm going to multiply by everything that's with the coefficient in front of aluminum. So I'll have a total of 4 aluminum atoms. Now I'm going to take the same coefficient, because when you have a coefficient, you must multiply everything in the formula by the coefficient. So now I'm going to make sure that I multiply my SO4 as well. When we have parentheses, we have to make sure of the 4 that's in the parentheses. We'll get to that in just a second. So looking at sulfur, when I multiply this across, there is no number here, so it represents 1. 2 times 1, coefficient times my subscript, is going to give me 2. So I have a total of 2 sulfur atoms. Now, in our parentheses here, we have a 4 for our oxygen atom, and I'm going to multiply that by the coefficient. Again, coefficient times my subscript. 2 times 4 will give me a total of 8. So I listed my elements. I counted each atom. 2 times 2, 4 for aluminum. 2 times 1 for the 1 sulfur we have. and 2 times 4 is 8 for the 4 oxygens that we have. The last thing to do with any of these is to total them up. So I have a total of 3 elements. I have a total of 4, 5, 6, and 8. It's 14 total atoms. So knowing that I have 14 total atoms, 3 total elements, we have now just used our subscripts and our coefficients to figure out how many atoms are in this formula. Another way we can do this, it's the longhand way, but I want to make sure that I show you it's the exact same thing. Instead of multiplying across, I have a coefficient of 2. So I can write 2Al2SO4 2 times and then add it up the same way. So if I have Al2SO4 written once and I have Al2SO4 written twice, that is the same as my 2Al2SO4. I can add this up. Al is my element. 2 plus 2 is going to give me 4. S is my element. 1s plus another 1s is going to equal 2 sulfur. And then I have oxygen here. There's 4 oxygen plus another 4 oxygen will give me a total of 8 oxygens. For a total of 14 atoms.